I thought I was seeing a predator carrying its kill until I realized the wolf had a human baby in her jaws, and she was walking straight toward me. When I saw the she-wolf with a baby in her jaws, my breath caught in my throat because I knew this wasn't an accident. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. It was late December, the kind of cold that cracks tree branches in the night. Snow was knee-deep, and there she was, moving down the narrow logging road, her paws sinking deep with every step. I froze where I stood, gripping the leather strap of my rifle, not daring to move. My heart was pounding so loud, I was certain she could hear it. I've spent more than 60 years in these woods. I've seen wolves before, fast, wary shadows, always ready to vanish. But this one, she was different. Her fur was thick with frost along her neck, her amber eyes fixed straight ahead, and in her jaws, God help me, was a human infant, not torn, not bleeding. The baby was wrapped in a thin, ice-crusted blanket. I swear I saw a tiny arm slip free, skin red from the cold, and the she-wolf lifted her head higher, so that little hand wouldn't brush the snow. My brain raced for an explanation. Was it an attack? A rescue? Was I hallucinating from the cold? Every instinct screamed to act, but something in her steady, deliberate steps held me in place. She stopped when she saw me. Snow drifted down onto her muzzle, onto the baby's blanket. She didn't flinch. There was no fear in her eyes. And that terrified me more than any growl could have. Wolves should fear people. They don't walk straight toward them. I didn't breathe. My fingers were numb from the cold, but it wasn't just the weather. I was frozen inside. I expected her to drop the child and bolt into the trees. That would have made sense. That would have been nature as I understood it. I took a slow step forward, and then she did something I'll never forget. Carefully, almost gently, she lowered her head and placed the baby on the snow. I didn't move, not a muscle. She stepped back 3 paces, never taking her eyes off me. The wind teased the frost from her fur. The baby whimpered, a thin, trembling cry that sliced straight through me. Alive. The child was alive. My throat tightened. My world, the one I thought I understood, shifted in that moment. She could have run, attacked, done anything. But she didn't. She had given him to me. I knelt, my gloves brushing the icy edge of the blanket. He was so light, his body trembling against the cold. I lifted him to my chest, feeling the weak flutter of life in him. The wolf moved again. My pulse surged. She was now barely 6 feet away, close enough for me to see each ice crystal clinging to her fur. She exhaled a visible cloud, circling slowly, then stopped at my side. Then, with no sound but the crunch of her paws, she began to dig. Snow flew in quick arcs until something dark appeared beneath, a small bundle. She tugged it free with her teeth and dropped it in the snow beside me. A bag. I opened it with shaking hands. Inside was a baby's bottle, still faintly warm, and another blanket, dry and soft. I nearly choked on my own breath. Who had left this here? Had she found it herself? How could she have known to bring it? I looked up at her. Those golden eyes were locked on mine, and in them I read something I still can't explain. Not a threat, not submission, but understanding. I wrapped the child in the dry blanket, pressing him against me to share my warmth. My cheeks stung from the wind, but I barely noticed anymore. There was only one thought in my mind. I had to follow her. She turned and walked toward the trees, glancing back at me every few steps. I hesitated. My legs felt like they belonged to someone else. Part of me thought it was over, that this was the miracle, and I could go back to the village knowing I'd witnessed the impossible. But what she did next made me forget how to breathe. I stepped out onto the narrow trail as quietly as I could, my boots sinking into the crusted snow. The she-wolf stopped instantly, her body still, but her eyes locked on mine. She didn't bare her teeth. She didn't growl. She just stood there, her breath fogging in the air between us. And in that moment, She looked at me as if I were one of her own. The baby whimpered softly in her jaws, not the shriek of fear or pain, but a weak, almost questioning sound. She adjusted her hold, careful, deliberate, the way I'd seen wolves carry their pups in spring. Every instinct in me screamed to act, to take the child and run. My knees tensed. My hand hovered over my rifle, though I didn't want to use it. I took a slow step forward, and in that instant, I was certain she'd bolt, vanish into the tree line like any wild creature would when cornered by a human. That was the ending I expected, the ending that made sense. But she didn't. Instead, she moved toward me. Just one step. Her paws pressed into the snow, leaving deep prints, and the sound of them breaking through the crust was louder than my heartbeat. Her gaze never wavered. Then, with a slow, careful motion, she bent her head and placed the baby on the snow between us. I froze. She backed away 3 paces, her tail low but not tucked, her head still high. It wasn't fear. It was space, an unspoken permission. The child stirred in the blanket, his tiny fists pressing against the cold air. I stepped forward, crouching, my hands shaking as I gathered him into my arms. His skin was icy against my gloves, his breathing shallow but steady. The she-wolf didn't move. She just watched. Her ears twitched once at the baby's soft cry, but she stayed rooted, her eyes on mine. I could feel something passing between us in that gaze. Not words, not thoughts, but a certainty I couldn't explain. It hit me then, hard. She wasn't here to harm. She had brought him to me. I wanted to believe that was all there was to it, a miracle in the snow, a story I could take back to the village and never forget. I even told myself right then, this is it. It's over. But it wasn't over. Because as I wrapped the baby tighter and rose to my feet, she took a step forward again. She wasn't done. Her head turned slightly, ears pricked, eyes shifting toward the deeper forest. Then she looked back at me, holding that look for a long, deliberate moment. It wasn't random. She was signaling me. I had no reason to follow. I had every reason to turn back, to get this baby to warmth and safety as fast as my legs could carry us, but there was something in her posture. Steady, patient, as if she were waiting for me to understand. The wind hissed through the pines. Somewhere far off, a branch cracked under the weight of snow. She didn't flinch. She just waited. My boots crunched as I took one step toward her. Her tail gave the smallest twitch, then she turned and started down the trail, her paws silent now on the snow. She glanced back once, checking that I was behind her. I held the baby close, his tiny body pressed against my chest for warmth, and I followed. I didn't know why. I didn't know where. I only knew one thing. This was not just a gesture of trust. I didn't yet realize it was something far more urgent. I adjusted the baby in my arms, making sure the blanket was tight around him. His small breaths puffed against my chest, fragile and uneven. I turned to head back toward the road, but the she-wolf wasn't leaving. She stood a few yards away, her eyes locked on me. Then, without warning, she dropped her head and began to dig. Snow flew in bursts beneath her paws, spraying against the air like shards of ice. She worked fast, almost frantic, sending clumps behind her. I watched, unsure if this was some instinct, some distraction, until something dark broke through the white. She slowed, pawing more carefully now, then nudged the object free with her muzzle. It was a small canvas sack. She backed up slightly, letting me see it. My boots crunched over the snow as I crouched down, keeping one arm firm around the baby while reaching for the sack with the other. The fabric was stiff with frost, but it wasn't frozen solid. I pulled the flap open. Inside was a baby's bottle, capped, half-filled, and still faintly warm. Beneath it was a folded fleece blanket, dry and soft. For a moment, my brain couldn't make sense of it. A wolf didn't collect human things. Someone must have dropped this, maybe days ago, and she'd found it by chance. That's what I told myself. That made it easier. I even muttered aloud, some hiker must have lost it. But when I looked up, she was staring at me again. Not just staring, holding me there with her eyes. Then she made a sound. It wasn't a snarl. It wasn't the sharp bark wolves use to call their pack. It was lower, almost a growl, but steady, like she was urging me, pressing me forward. The sound sent a shiver through me. She wasn't warning me off. She was asking, no, demanding, that I follow her. I glanced down at the child. His eyelids fluttered, his lips moving faintly, as if trying to feed. My instincts told me to get him back to warmth as soon as possible. Every second in this cold was a risk. And yet, there was something about the way she stood, her body angled toward the forest, but her head turned toward me, ears pricked, waiting. It was absurd to think an animal could be telling me something. But she'd already done the impossible by bringing me this child alive. Was I really going to decide, right here, that I'd reached the limit of what I was willing to believe? I took a breath and stepped toward her. She shifted instantly, turning deeper into the woods. Every few paces she'd look back, checking that I was still behind her. I clutched the baby close, feeling the faint warmth of the bottle in my coat pocket, and moved as quickly as the snow would allow. The forest closed in around us. Branches heavy with snow bent low, brushing my shoulders. My breath came out in clouds, mixing with the thin mist of hers when she slowed to let me keep up. I told myself this was crazy. I told myself I was risking both our lives following a predator into the deep woods in the middle of winter. But I couldn't shake the feeling, deep in my bones, that turning back now would mean leaving something undone. I didn't know it yet, but this was no random trail she was leading me on. I kept going, and that's when it began. The kind of thing you don't even want to imagine. The she-wolf's trail cut deeper into the forest, winding between tall pines until the trees thinned into a small clearing. My legs burned from pushing through the drifts, but I kept going, clutching the baby to my chest. Then I saw it. At the far side of the clearing, a massive spruce had toppled in the last storm, its trunk heavy with snow. Beneath it, half buried, was the faint outline of a vehicle. For a moment I thought it was abandoned, just another wreck the winter had claimed. But as I got closer, I saw the frost patterns on the glass, the way they had melted slightly on the inside. There was someone in there. The she-wolf slowed, circling the car in wide, deliberate arcs. She didn't approach the doors. She didn't try to get inside. She just kept her distance, eyes sweeping the woods, ears flicking at every sound. I waded through the snow to the driver's side, brushing away the powder that had built up against the window. A woman sat slumped in the seat, her head resting against the steering wheel. Her skin was pale, her lips tinged blue. For one heart-stopping second, I thought she was gone. Then I saw the faintest rise and fall of her chest. She was breathing, barely. I tried the door. It resisted for a moment, frozen in place, then gave way with a groan. Cold air rushed in. She stirred slightly, a shallow gasp escaping her lips. I glanced back at the wolf. She had stopped moving, standing perfectly still now, watching me, guarding the clearing. And that's when it hit me. The way she'd stayed close to the baby, the way she'd led me here, the way she was positioned now. She'd been watching over them, protecting them, until someone came. She had been the sentry. I pulled the blanket from my pack and draped it over the woman, checking her pulse. Weak, but there. The baby shifted in my arms, as if sensing we had found the one he belonged to. For a moment, I thought this was the end of it. The pieces all made sense now. The baby, the bottle, the trail. She'd brought me to his mother. My job was clear. Get them both out. Get them warm. Get them safe. I even let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. But before I could take another step toward the car, the she-wolf turned. She didn't wait for me. She didn't look back. She simply slipped between the trees, her gray coat vanishing against the snow and shadows. It was like she'd finished what she came to do. I thought that was the last I'd see of her. I was wrong. Her story had only just begun. Several days passed before my hands stopped shaking whenever I thought about that day in the woods. The woman and her baby were safe now, recovering in the small clinic in town. I'd checked on them twice, though I didn't tell her exactly how I'd found them. I wasn't sure she'd believe me, but I couldn't stop thinking about the wolf. Every night, lying in my cabin, I'd see her amber eyes in the dark, hear the crunch of her paws in the snow, feel that strange certainty in my chest, that she'd trusted me with something beyond comprehension. I told myself she was long gone, back to her own life somewhere deep in the forest, and that I'd never see her again. Then, one morning, I was out checking trap lines along the riverbank when movement caught my eye. She stepped out from between the spruces, the sunlight flashing along her fur. For a second, I thought I was imagining her, just my mind pulling me back to the memory. But no, she was real. She was here, and she wasn't alone. 3 small shapes stumbled after her, their paws clumsy in the crusted snow. Wolf pups, barely old enough to keep up with her, their ears too big for their heads, their legs wobbly. I froze where I stood, my breath caught halfway in my throat. She spotted me instantly. There was no hesitation in her steps. She padded forward, her pups trailing behind, stopping every few feet to sniff the air or tumble into one another. My first instinct was to turn and leave, to give her space. She was with her young, and wolves can be unpredictable when it comes to protecting their own. That was the smart thing to do, the safe thing. I even started to step back, telling myself, this isn't my place, but she didn't growl, didn't stop. Instead, she kept closing the distance between us until she was just 10 feet away. Then she turned her head, made a soft, low sound, and the pups came stumbling up beside her. One by one, they moved closer, so close I could see their tiny paws pressing into the snow. The smallest one, with a patch of white on his chest, sniffed at my boot before collapsing in a little heap. And that's when it hit me. She was showing them to me. She was introducing me to her family. The air seemed to still around us. The river murmured faintly under the ice, but all I could hear was the pounding of my own heart. I crouched slowly, meeting her gaze. There was no fear in it, just that same strange recognition I'd felt before. We stayed like that for what felt like minutes, neither of us moving, the pups nosing around in the snow between us. It should have ended there, a quiet moment in the winter sun before she gathered her young and slipped away. But then I noticed something. Tracks in the snow, not hers, not the pups, bigger, wider, leading away from the tree line and looping around behind us. Bear tracks. I didn't understand why they were there yet, but I would. And when I did, I realized she hadn't just come to show me her pups. She had come because she needed me again. The bear tracks were fresh. I could tell by the way the snow edges were still crumbling into the depressions. The size of them made my stomach tighten. A big male, heavy enough to break through the icy crust with every step. And he was close. The she-wolf stood over her pups now, her ears high, her gaze fixed on the direction the tracks came from. Her tail was low but steady, no panic, just readiness. That's when I understood. She hadn't just wandered into my path to show me her family. She had led me here, the same way she had with the baby. She needed help. I looked down at the tracks again, following their arc through the trees. They weren't random. They looped around, then angled toward the clearing where her pups had been playing in the snow. The bear wasn't just passing through. He was hunting. I swore under my breath and reached for the old radio in my coat pocket. I wasn't far from one of the other lines, where 2 hunters were working their own trap checks. They answered quick, their voices cracking in the cold air. Within 10 minutes, I heard the crunch of snowshoes and the rattle of rifles being unslung. The bear must have caught our scent before we saw him. A low, rolling growl came from the tree line, and then he stepped out, a massive, dark shape against the white. His head swung slowly from side to side, and even from 30 yards I could see the frost caked on his muzzle. The hunters spread out, shouting, waving their arms. I fired a single shot into the air, the sound exploding through the clearing like a thunderclap. The bear stopped, sniffed, then let out a bellowing roar that rattled in my chest. It could have gone either way, but after a few long, tense seconds, he turned. The crunch of his retreat faded into the forest, leaving only the echo of our voices and the quick panting of the wolf pups. I lowered my rifle. The hunters moved in closer, one of them muttering, "Never seen one that bold this early in the season." I didn't answer. My eyes were on her. The she-wolf stood at the far edge of the clearing, the pups pressed against her legs. She didn't move toward me, didn't make a sound, but her gaze was steady. And I knew she understood what had just happened. Then, with a flick of her ears, she herded the pups toward the shadow of the trees. I thought that was it. I'd done my part. She would vanish now, the way wild things do, folding back into the wilderness, where I'd never find her again. I even told myself she was gone for good, but the next morning, I saw her again. Not close, just a pale shape between the trunks, half hidden by mist. She didn't approach. She just stood there watching. She stayed like that for 3 days, always near, always just far enough away that I couldn't reach her. I didn't know it then, but she wasn't lingering out of caution. She was waiting, and when she finally stepped forward, it wasn't to ask for help. It was to give me something I never expected, her final gift. Spring had come quietly that year. The snow was retreating in ragged patches, and the air smelled of wet earth and pine sap. The rivers ran high, swollen with meltwater, and the forest was waking up, the kind of season when you start to believe winter might really be over. I was walking the ridge trail one morning, the sun warm on my shoulders, when I saw her. The she-wolf. She stood in the open at the far end of the clearing, her coat thinner now, the frost long gone from her fur. There was no tension in her stance, no flicker of caution in her eyes. I stopped where I was, the years of habit telling me not to crowd her space. But she didn't move away. Instead, she came toward me. Her steps were unhurried, steady, the pads of her paws almost silent against the damp ground. When she reached the edge of my shadow, she began to circle me slowly, not in a predator's arc, but in something else entirely. Then she stopped in front of me, her head lowered, her jaws opening just enough for something to drop onto the ground at my feet, a piece of fresh deer hide. I stared at it, not quite believing what I was seeing. Wolves sometimes carry food for their pack, their pups, but this wasn't for them. This was for me, a gift. The weight of that sank into me so hard, I had to take a breath before I could move. I crouched, my eyes never leaving hers, and picked up the hide. It was still warm from the hunt. She watched me without blinking, her amber gaze steady. And that's when the thought struck me, clear as the morning air. This is gratitude I haven't earned, because what I had done, bringing her to the mother and the child, helping protect her pups, it didn't seem like enough to warrant this. Not from her, not from the wild. We stayed like that for a long moment, 2 creatures from different worlds sharing the same space, neither of us making a sound. Eventually, she stepped back. Her tail swayed once, a slow, deliberate movement, before she turned as if to leave. I thought that was the end of it. That this was the closing of our story, the part where we both walked away with nothing left unsaid. But then I heard a voice, a woman's voice. I turned, and there, Just beyond the line of bushes was the mother, the same woman I'd pulled from the frozen car months ago. Her hair was longer now, her face fuller, the pallor of that winter day replaced with color, and in her arms was the child. The same child I had first seen in the wolf's jaws. They both stood there, the woman smiling faintly, the boy's wide eyes fixed on me, and then, to my surprise, on the wolf. The she-wolf had stopped. She looked at them, and the boy reached a small hand toward her from the safety of his mother's arms. The forest felt suddenly smaller, as if the distance between all of us had collapsed into a single point in time. And that's when I understood. She stepped out from the trees, the boy in her arms, the spring sunlight warming both their faces. I still had the piece of deer hide in my hands, its warmth fading into my palms. For a long moment, no one moved. The she-wolf stood at the edge of the clearing, her head high, her amber eyes shifting between me and the woman. It was the woman who broke the silence. "I've been looking for you," she said, her voice quiet, almost hesitant. I took a step toward her, the soft earth muffling my boots. You're all right?" She nodded, her gaze dropping briefly to the child in her arms before lifting again to me. "We are. Because of you." I started to shake my head, but she cut me off. "And because of her." The boy wriggled slightly, his eyes fixed on the wolf, a tiny hand reaching out toward her. The she-wolf didn't move closer, but she didn't back away either. The woman's voice dropped, almost as if she wasn't sure she should say what came next. That night, I remember pieces. I'd been driving too fast, trying to beat the storm. The car slid, hit something, rolled into the trees. I must have blacked out. But before I did, she glanced at the wolf again. I saw her. My breath caught. She was just sitting there, the woman said, right outside the broken window, snow falling all around her. I could barely move, but I remember her eyes. I remember feeling safe, like nothing could get to us. I could see it in my mind, the car half buried in snow, the woman slumped inside, and the she-wolf standing guard in the blizzard, watching, waiting. She didn't let anything near us, the woman went on. I heard movement in the dark. I think other animals came close, but they didn't stay. She was there until you came. I know it. Something inside me shifted. I'd spent all this time thinking she had acted on some rare impulse, a flash of wild instinct that happened to save a life. But it wasn't that. It was deliberate. The same way she'd guarded her own pups from the bear, she had guarded this woman and her child, not for food, not for territory, not for any reason I could explain with logic. For them. I looked back at her. She was still there, silent, her gaze steady. And in that moment, I felt the full weight of what had happened. The fear of seeing her with that baby in her jaws, the astonishment when she laid him at my feet, the urgency when she led me to the wreck, the quiet understanding in her eyes when I'd returned her gift. Fear had given way to gratitude. Gratitude had swelled into something heavier, something that tightened in my throat and made my vision blur. And now it was something else entirely. Reverence. Because this wasn't just about a rescue, this wasn't a coincidence. She hadn't only saved her own blood, she had crossed that invisible line between wild and human, and she had done it with purpose. The boy laughed suddenly, a bright, small sound. His mother smiled and looked at me. "He likes her," she said softly. I managed a nod, though my chest felt too tight to speak. We stood there until the wolf finally turned, walking back toward the trees without hurry, her shape fading into the green and gold light. She didn't look back this time. I let out a slow breath. If someone had told me this, I said, half to myself, I wouldn't have believed them. My eyes stayed on the spot where she'd vanished, but I saw it with my own eyes. The she-wolf saved a human being the way she would save her own. And I knew I would carry that truth with me for the rest of my life.